Edgar.
Okay, we're going live now. If we could have silence, please. Everyone in their seats. So, good afternoon and welcome to the Chief Constable and his team, and to the board members and to all of those who have joined us online and in the public gallery today. We have slightly changed our running order, so the public session is earlier, and we have a further private session with the Chief Constable and his team to follow this. Chief Constable, we have your accountability report, and I think we'll start with the good news before we get moved to the bad news. It's been a busy month with a series of events, but perhaps most important was the publication of the Violence Against Women and Girls Action Plan. As we read in your report today, increases in incidents of repeat victimization of females, and particularly in respect of domestic abuse. We know why this plan really is so much needed. We also welcome the commitments and actions to ensure that where standards fall below those that we would expect in terms of how officers and staff treat each other and the public, action will be taken. In terms of standards and ethics, you know that this is an issue that the board has been involved with over a period of time. And over a series of meetings, we've been looking at the handling of misconduct cases, standards, ethics, and culture within the service, and whether the policies and procedures in place are sufficiently robust for dealing with inappropriate behaviours and actions. We've also been looking at the speed with which misconduct cases are processed and the associated costs of the policing budget. Members have welcomed steps that are being taken by the PSNI to deal with board concerns, as we know the resulting impact such cases have on overall public confidence and on the reputation of PSNI. However, members are also agreed that changes are now required to current misconduct legislation and updates required by the PSNI Code of Ethics. As such, it is the board's intention to publish a paper in November with recommendations for making improvements, and we will continue to keep this area under close review. Resourcing and recruitment. Since our last meeting, you have moved to pause further recruitment officers in this financial year, and we've just received further correspondence from you regarding the PSNI's financial position. It's not looking good, as I think we all know. You know that through our discussions, we very much share your concerns on the impacts of this situation. We know that where there were going to be impacts on the service, on what you can deliver and can't deliver in the future, and as well as the written submissions we've already made, I will be taking this up again with the Minister in our meeting next week. We obviously want to protect the investment in local policing teams. Also know that commitments have been made in various documents and plans, so there needs to be clear assessment of the impacts that you foresee. This will need to be communicated so there is no ambiguity, and we're also concerned at the impact reduced resources in other public services will have on policing, as very often you end up picking up other people's shortfalls by being the service of last as well as first resort. We will, of course, continue to lobby for better funding settlement, but the picture is not looking good given the pressures faced. So, Chief Constable, over to you for your opening statements, and then we'll move to questions. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you, Chair and members. And just a few things to say this morning. As you say, we've changed the running order, so to let the questions continue. Just as you say, Chair, a few bits to pick out of the monthly report. Firstly, acknowledgement, I think, of the benefit of planning and attention to detail, and to pay tribute to Chief Superintendent Davy Beck, who was the person responsible for running our response to Her Majesty's death, the proclamation, the royal visit, and the funeral, and also to signal how much feedback we've had about the 50+ officers we actually sent to London to support the policing of the funeral. So we had sort of from all sorts of different walks of life, people extremely impressed by the way they engage the public, which is a tribute to them and, in a sense, the policing style that they represent. Similarly, in relation to the Violence Against Women and Girls launch, it was a thanks to the support for members that did get to the launch. I think it was a really constructive morning. Clearly, the hard work is now before us to deliver on the commitments that you outlined there, Chair, but that's picked up in page 12. Clearly, as ever in these monthly sort of sessions, there's the tempo of our work to tackle paramilitary and organised crime continues. You'll see some narrative there, which is brought up to date by a large seizure of drugs at the weekend in Belfast Harbour, so our commitment remains unresolved. And clearly, since we last met, probably the keynote operational event for us has been the murder in West Belfast, which obviously remains a fast-paced and live investigation, whereas we've said the other day, there were a number of active lines of inquiry now running. As you would expect, the senior investigating officer is developing a number of different hypotheses in relation to that. I know there's a lot of speculation about what lies behind this, but in terms of reassurance to the public, we have stepped up foot patrols in the immediate vicinity, and I think as this morning we still hold the crime scene. The report again highlights today some of the narrative around operational performance, Chair, as you've alluded to, plus some headlines around our assessment of the likely impacts in terms of scenario planning of the continued crisis and cost of living, but also on a more constructive note, point members to the new website, which is part of our sort of broader ambition to make it more accessible and use technology to push work into different places, and that seems to be going well. What's not in the report, but it's probably worth a quick mention, given some of the narrative and media commentary in England and Wales, is the position in relation to burglary. You'll see a lot of chatter this week and debate about the response to a crime when there's an invasion of someone's safe space, someone's home. We continue and always have responded to burglary dwelling calls, burglary in your home, so that we're not affected by the changes in England and Wales that you see. And we continue to solve roughly 1 in 10 burglary crimes. There's always more to do, but comparatively a reasonable position, although crime itself is down. Clearly, the report notes some important commemorative events we've had in the last few weeks, where again, some of you were able to join us at the commemorations for 100 years of policing, and it was our turn to host the National Police Memorial Day. And again, a lot of constructive feedback from delegates from across the UK about how well officers on the ground and indeed probationers at the event who were helping sort of manage the people that came represented themselves and us. I suppose, as you say, Chair, the big issue still remains in front of us, which we highlight at page 5 and 6, the rather bleak financial and economic outlook we face. I'm sure we'll get into questions both now and in the next session about our plans. I think the key thing to reassure you about, in terms of the contingency planning, we want to come to you within the next few weeks with more specifics about the actual impacts. I mean, the assumption is less officers and less staff will mean different levels of service. On the one hand, when we're speaking to yourselves and indeed victims and members of the public beyond here, you have our assurance that we will continue to manage the 999 service, to respond to emergencies and to investigate serious crime. But we'll be able to come back to you with more detail in the next few weeks about what will look differently as the numbers of people we have to do the work shrinks. And I think for now, I sort of will press pause, Chair, and just open it to members' questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Chief Constable. We're going to start with the budgetary position and the finance, and I'm going to ask Colm to ask the first question, please. Colm McKenna.
Chair, thank you, and Chief Constable, thank you for your report. Depressing as though the financial bit reads. Can I just ask where you are on that at the present time? You know, since the report, I am getting quite concerned just with the overall financial position across the UK, the austerity which may be coming down the tracks and the results, and what that might mean for public finances here. I suppose a couple of questions I have is, what more can you look at stopping or reducing safely while ensuring that commitment to neighbourhood policing is maintained? And to what extent are you engaging with the DOJ family, particularly because obviously not all parts of the DOJ family will necessarily overspend their budget. The but many will. But it's having that discussion, and also those broader discussions across government with partners across government, already alluded to by the chair. The PSNI do appear to be the last resort and sometimes the first resort. Do they fully understand the implications that might flow from fewer police numbers, for example? And finally, it needs to be a longer term strategy, because this is not going to get better next year. If anything, it'll get worse next year. We need to be cognizant of that, and we need to see how quickly, given that there may be more capital available, is there a way that we can bring forward some of the digital plans that might actually take pressure off?
Thanks, Colm. A lot there, and I'll bring Pamela in to answer the detail, because to reassure you, there is an awful lot of detailed work going on behind the scenes, as you'd imagine at the moment, because ultimately the exam question on everyone's lips is what will it look like and what's going to be different. But we are in active dialogue, particularly with the Department of Justice and the Permanent Secretary and Minister, about issues, consequences, the impact of that, so that we're making our voice heard. And longer term, and again, we'll either come back to this meeting or through committee, as we sort of get more clarity from the force management statement process that we're using, is really the key platform this year to get insight into what we're doing, at what sort of level of service, and therefore, as we project forward around reducing officer and staff numbers, what the likely effect will be with a bit more science. So in business speak, the likelihood is by next year you will see more dramatic changes to our structure, our operating model, etc. But at the moment, we're managing within, if you like, the as-is position. But I'll bring Pamela in to give you a bit more detail.
Thanks, Colm. Yeah, it's a difficult picture, is for sure, and the chair made reference to the most recent letter to the policing board, and it was important that we raise the severity of the situation, and that letter reinforces the opening position of the £59 million gap, but that in addition to that, we were anticipating further pressures which crystallised around the summer, projecting a pressure for pay and the pressure around utility cost. Your question with regards to what more, out of the original £59 million, 10 million approximately of that was headcount, by way of headcount reduction. The other 50 was a mixture of measures of reducing non-pay spend, an element of reducing overtime, and some assumed funding. And you'd be aware with our advice in recent letters around recruitment and crystallising that headcount, there's nowhere further to go in that. So when you say what else, there's nowhere further that we can exercise on headcount. We had commissioned, and we will be discussing it tomorrow morning, what further opportunities on the non-pay side that we can take. And again, those have been assessed by way of low, medium and high risk. And there might be a little bit in that, and if Mark even wants to sort of come in on that, but there'll be a little bit, but the thing is it won't be the 40 million. And I think it is important to recognise that we are saying, that costs will exceed the contingency planning envelope in the absence of a budget that we've got at the moment. Simon touched on, those were measures that we had to take this year because in year are short measures, but you're right with regards to longer term. The force management statement is the mechanism for that, by way of changing our operating model, as you say, crystallising in some of the digital capacity and opportunities that presents us, and indeed progressing business cases and seeking departmental approval and support for some of the estate rationalisation that we might do, that not only delivers against our estate strategy, but can in fact help us in some of the revenue savings on the maintenance of those estate, etc., and deliver towards a sustainability strategy.
I don't think we need to get any more detail as we move forward. I would just encourage the Simon and the senior team just to have a real good look at how we're going to manage with what may be a fewer headcount and how we're going to deliver the service that's expected by the population.
Yeah. Thank you. Supplementary question on this from Trevor.
Thank you, Chair. I suppose we're all conscious of the financial position of the police. However, I suppose when we hear the numbers, reducing numbers, we hear previous promises of, well, certainly it wasn't your promises, it was commitments from political parties to get it to 7,500. Trajectory seems to be heading to 6,000. I suppose, first of all, are you confident, you referenced the Department of Justice, are you confident they're doing as much as they should be doing to support, to try get that, change that trajectory to head backwards, upwards? And secondly then, I suppose from an astonishment perspective, that you're continuing then to advertise other jobs. I picked up one here today, a business transformation coordinator and a business transformation officer. What is the need for those jobs in the current climate whenever we're hearing of cuts and normal attrition within the service.
Yeah, I just broadly, Trevor, I mean, in fairness, between all of us, I think there's various levels of conversation, as you'd expect, particularly with officials within the Department of Justice. Certainly, I can't speak on behalf of him, but certainly my reflection on conversations I've had with the Permanent Secretary, he understands how stark our position is, and he is advocating with others. But the likely, response to that is really beyond all of our control. And similarly, in fairness to the dialogue we would have with the Minister of Justice, she appreciates, if you go back to the start of the year, the fiscal studies that showed Justice taking the biggest proportion hit of the budget. All that narrative is there. The unknown is when the budget is finally set, because technically we haven't got one, what the likely effect is. And similarly, there is always going to be the debate about different jobs within a large organisation, but there was a judgment call that in some parts of the business, as if Colm said, for example, we need to reprofile and re-engineer the business. We need the skills to help us do that. And we've got to make individual choices about those jobs we continue to advertise, because I think the difference is, without sending the mixed message out, it's not we've got no money, we've just got a reducing budget, and we've got to make discrete choices about where we think that post needs filling and where it doesn't. And there's a process that Pamela or Claire can talk about that helps us do that.
Just pick up a little bit on the recruitment aspect of it. Trevor, you're quite right. I mean, headcount reduction across officer and staff. So police staff is reducing also, so it's not just police officers. There is a recognition that we didn't completely freeze recruitment from the start of the year. There has been a level of recruitment, so both on the police officer and police staff side. But we've just touched on, to change the organisation, as you touched on officers, 1,000 fewer, on staff, 300-400 fewer over the next couple of years, takes a significant amount of modelling, understanding service operating models, support operational delivery teams making those changes. And the honesty is we require, we need that level of support. We had people in those roles, we're replacing them, they're not new roles. And that's within Aldrina's team as a transformation to affect those changes that we need to make over the next couple of years. So there will still be key roles, both for police officers and police staff, that we will need to recruit into and replace. So it's not a complete recruitment freeze, but we, as part of our resource allocation model, and those now meet weekly, we're assessing where our highest risk is by way of service delivery and making sure we've got the right people with the right skills to enable this to go forward over the next number of years.
But would you accept that, given that there is a confidence issue as well? I mean, it's no secret now, the 2021 recruitment campaign, some of those people applied in 2021 may not get called to the service to 2025. And at the same time, they're reading advertisements for more civilianised jobs within the service. And I mean, that's not taken away from the 4 senior jobs in your own particular team, which this board supported, because we've seen, obviously, there's an opportunity to reshape and reform the civilian side of the force and actually bring that a different degree of professionalism. But can you not understand the bit of frustration from people? Those people since 2021 being told today that their chances of entering the PSNI in terms of their career move won't happen to 2025. But at the same time, you're advertising for other jobs for transformation within the police.
I can, but I mean, it is an outworking of the budgetary position that we're in, that we're having to change the service model, how we work, what that operating model looks like. And those teams in the transformation teams, they're a blend of officers and staff. There has to be a recognition that we need certain skills on the frontline policing side of it, and we're still recruiting this year, not at the speed, you're quite right, not at the speed that we would like to, and that means that the 2021 campaign won't be effective as quickly as we would like. But we do need skills to support us. I mean, this is a significant and a huge business service change that we need to undertake this year and the next couple of years. And we need to support the frontline operational officers and staff in taking that forward. So I understand the concern of people not getting in as quickly as they would like to, but we do need to look at where we have the skills and capability to make sure we can deliver the service in an effective way.
Okay, thank you. Going to move on to look at the area of neighbourhood policing and the resources for that, which you said will be protected before, and also call handling. And going to ask Michael to put his question, please.
Chief Constable, good morning. And thanks very much for the report. Just one quick observation. It's very helpful, I think, now to see the performance sheet distilled down with some quite specific metrics and baseline comparisons, which I think makes it much easier for us to understand where you're coming from, some of these points. I did want to raise just in terms of the neighbourhood policing, following on from the outworkings of the local policing review, which dates back to 2018, the Chief Constable has continued to reinforce commitment to the neighbourhood policing and the additional resources being put in place locally through the neighbourhood policing teams as a key tenet of strategy. And indeed, the board has recently been updated on progress in this area against the LPR actions and to commit to completing outstanding actions by March 2023. And it's really just in the context of the evolving situation, whether, Chief, you believe that you can continue to press forward with this commitment in this critical area, given the emerging budgetary constraints?
Yeah, thanks, Michael. I think there's two sort of lenses to look at this through. That's clearly in the work that we're doing at the moment. We've set out with an assumption of protecting Treble 9 response and neighbourhood policing that we see as the key sort of contracts with the public, and that's not to say other parts of the organisation don't matter. The resolve to preserve neighbourhood policing remains, although again, Pamela or Claire may sort of give some detail if you want of the actual outworkings we're now facing, because clearly, going back to Trevor's question, as the number of people coming in is reducing, well, people are still leaving. So, and we can't necessarily always affect where from. So there are vacancies emerging across neighbourhood policing teams. But as an aspiration and as a philosophy, absolutely. The question we will be coming back to you with as we resolve some of the difficult choices we've got to make is just what do neighbour officers actually do? And I think a likelihood it will be different to how we're currently constructed. So there's questions about who carries crime investigations and where they sit, which may change the constituency of a neighbourhood policing team. But the underpinning issue of the foundation, absolutely. I think when the board last looked at this, there were 8 recommendations that we were still working on after the local policing review. That work continues because some of them are more enduring and a lot of them relate to, from memory, to partnership working arrangements around vulnerable people and things like that. So, and training of officers. So no matter what, we still got to invest in people and manage some of the risk. Certainly conversation Mark and I have had operationally is the notion of single patrol is probably less beneficial to try and pursue that at the moment. So I would imagine that will slow as a piece of work. But I don't know if Pamela wants to say anything else about the actual effect, or leave it there, Chair.
Okay. Michael?
Well, I mean, just the observation, I understand the response very clearly, Chief. I suppose just we have seen the benefits coming through some of the outworkings of South Armagh in terms of how effective that model can be. So we hope, very much hope that you can continue to persist in that area. Chief, I just wanted to ask you, do you want me to pull in the next question, if you don't mind? Just you mentioned the 999 and you've referred to that, Chief, in your forward to your report. And if we think about 999 and the 101 call handling services, could you give us an update, please, on current 999 performance, response times, etc., and how you feel this compares to other UK forces at the minute, and particularly any concerns you might have in being able to maintain this performance in the light of budgetary pressures? We've heard some noises about level of retention of resources in that area, and given also on the 101 side, given the historic high level of non-crime related calls, which are often referred to, will the budgetary pressures have any impact in that area as well? I know there's a lot there, but thanks.
I'll try and pick most of that up, Michael. If I miss anything, I'm sure Mark will dive in. I think firstly, to reference the 999 issue, as of the end of last month, we answered 95% of our calls within 10 seconds. That's the best level of answering since April 2018. So that is credit to hard work that people have been doing. It's always difficult when you get into league tables and like-for-like comparisons, but as best we would understand it at the moment, there's a level of detail that sits behind this between how we measure answering times and how BT do, who provide the first bit of the service. But on that sort of data, we are ranked at 6 in the UK at the moment. So that is strong performance. The philosophy, many of you will have been in and out of this, and certainly in a different place if anyone ever wants to come and see the contact centres to see actually the level of work and how work is monitored. There's an open invitation there. But the operational presumption is always to protect the reliability of the 999 answering for obvious reasons. So at busy times, that will mean longer waits for 101 calls. We have seen over the last sort of 6-9 months a lot of churn within the contact centres. There is the succession planning issue and a recruitment pipeline. We've got about 20 people coming into roles over the next few weeks and months, both for induction and then for training, which gets back to Trevor's question. We've got to assess where we still recruit. We've seen a deterioration in the speed of answering 101 calls, which is a frustration because it will present other risks if you don't attend to them quickly. Either people drop off or they ring back or they ring 999, so you get a virtuous circle. But the thing that complements it is you'll see in the report the announcements of the new website, which is the first of a phase of introductions. I think Colm was talking about investments before. We want to try and bring the Amazon sort of experience to contact with the police so that eventually, apart from getting information more easily, you can report crime and incidents, you'll be able to conduct transactions with us, and you'll be able to upload information. So, for example, I know there's a big plan about dash cam footage. So there is a number of tracks to this in terms of managing what is one of the key relationships with the public. But I don't know if I've missed anything, Mark.
The only point, just one of the points was in terms of maybe the resources on the ground, the drivers, Chief, and whether you see any issues there, or even some of the work that you're doing within the force management statement is maybe helping the efficiencies in the way that you allocate resources.
Well, just to that point, so at Performance Board this week, we examined the data we have around time limits from call taken to arrival at scene, and the median for Northern Ireland is less than 10 minutes. Now, there are outliers around that. There are individual cases of outliers, but our median is less than 10 minutes, and it's consistently so this year. So I think most of the emergency services would take those statistics as a median, although I caveat that there will be individual ones that go longer than that, but the median is less than 10 minutes. So there has been no noticeable impact other than, as I say, if we go to individual calls, on our performance in getting to 999 calls. Sufficient to say, Chair, that there has been a continued focus on 999 performance in the last 2.5 years. Pre-COVID, throughout COVID, and continues to be. And at the minute, we're in a fairly confident place in terms of that emergency response.
Thank you. Going to move on to a different area now, and Mike Nesbitt's going to bring the next question with regard to under 18 strip searches, and that will be followed by a question from Linda Dillon with regard to stop and search. So, Mike.
Chair, thank you. Good morning, Simon. You gave us a figure for last year of the number of strip searches of under 18s, I believe in a formal custody setting. We were then informed that 25% of those searches did not, in fact, happen. So three questions spring to mind. How come that error was allowed to happen repeatedly? How did you find out that the error had occurred? And what does it say about the confidence we should have in the statistics the police service provides the board?
Yeah, well, there's three bits there. The numbers are low in terms of the number of strip searches and custody, and the kernel of this, which we went through recently, Chris and I, in another place, it's a software issue with Niche, which is the key platform for recording custody interventions, so that it was, if you like, triggering the wrong response. And therefore, when we had a look in this more detail, that was when the fix was seen as evident. We've now, because the way Niche works, it's a national platform for 20 plus police services. We can't just fix it ourselves. We have to go into a list to get the fix made, which we're doing at the moment. There is the work that Chris Todd does in terms of how we understand these things and where it goes. So I know a number of members have taken interest on the new sort of architecture he's put in place to monitor the use of police powers, and this being one of the suite of indicators he's looking at. The actual point in time where we recognised it. I'll have to go away and check unless Mark remembers that who found it at what point.
Yeah, no, so Mike, as part of the process recently of interrogating this, because this became a national issue, we started to look at it as well, and then we started to question our own figures. So there was I think it was a meeting probably that I chaired, that we asked certain questions about the data, and then we went away and confirmed that there was errors in the data, which is primarily to do with human input. It's a data accuracy issue, which we're trying to solve through a better fix. I'm not offering that as an excuse, Mike. That's the explanation. But we went looking at the specific figures. I asked for more figures myself about understanding what was in custody, what was outside of custody, where there was appropriate adults present, where there wasn't appropriate adults present, and it's in that process I understand that we found the errors.
Okay, thank you. I am still confused. I mean, how can there be a software error? And also, I believe I read that what you're saying was that officers ticked the wrong box. So that was, did you strip search, yes or no? And they're saying yes when the answer was no. I just don't get it.
Yeah, I think rather than sort of trying to understand what you might have been sent, so I've not got it in front of me, we can probably, through the chair, explore the detail online or offline a little easier, either with a written response or physically to show you. My understanding is just on the drop-down menu on the niche system, and there's been an error of interpreting that. But equally, the numbers are very low here, Mike, so that the chances of spotting it against the volume of everything else that's going on, although it's an intrusive use of police powers, is relatively low, unless someone's sitting over somebody's shoulder. But I think the work that Mark's done has shown where the gap is, but probably it's easy to explain who said what to who when in a different setting, because I haven't got the information that you've been sent.
Well, I'll leave it there, Chair, except to say I think the number is not relevant, Simon. It's such a sensitive issue. And the margin for error in my mind should be 0%, not 25%.
Okay, thank you. And again, if we can offline have further information, that would be helpful. Thank you. Okay, Linda, you have a question on stop and search.
Thank you, Chief Constable. And you'll be aware I've raised this issue on a number of occasions. It's specifically around stop and search of young people. And I'm just wondering, do PSNI have any intention to work with youth services on how to engage with young people that might actually prevent a search happening if that initial engagement is, I suppose, more positive? Because young people, as we know, can become very defensive very quickly if they think that, you know, other people are looking, and for a number of different reasons, that as you get older you might have a different approach. But I would be very honest and say that I struggle with engaging sometimes with young people in my own area in very difficult circumstances, and I always look to advice there from people in that youth service sector.
Well, again, it's a bit like Mike's point. It's in the broader suite of police powers that are important, and quite rightly the scrutiny of how we do it. Again, we can write to you separately in relation to this. There's an inspector in OSD who's been doing some really interesting work, some pilot work, looking at, we've done a survey about relationships with young people and attitudes towards the police. A lot of the information there would point to certainly areas of learning and that sort of semi-conflict situation that you point to. And there's a number of, I think it's 8 or 9 pilot initiatives that fall out of that in terms of training to officers, but also, as you say, with other partners, how we engage differently in that interaction. That's probably something, again, we can follow up separately in a written response to give you the detail. But I know it's an important issue to Chris Todd and his emerging work group, because we want to get this right, and also the general scrutiny that Mark brings through the performance system.
Okay, thank you. And Nuala wants to come in with supplementary.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you. Chief, I just wanted to ask a follow-up on that. You know, any pilot programs or anything moving forward to kind of rebuild or build confidence with young people in policing is to work alongside young people, and particularly in relation to the first questions asked around finance and what neighbourhood policing is like, is that we know that a great deal of resources spent dealing with young people. But I think it's important that we also ask them and speak to them in a manner where there is not behaviour that requires a police presence, but rather engagement. And I think that's very important, that can be taken on board whenever we move forward with pilot programs, is actually engaging with them before we implement them.
Yeah, and again, I think if I can chat through the work that Chris has got, which I think from early chats we've had, you know, is starting to create a structure around reference groups and bringing greater scrutiny, which will then trigger more questions about where we should go for learning. There's also the work that Bobby Sinclair has got around the general refresh of engagement, which effectively means how we talk to people. And I think they're both really valid points. We're keen to see where we need to learn. We're looking at where the data and evidence points to, but also how we train and educate officers to do what is an intrusive interaction in a way that, you know, leaves people with dignity and understanding that sometimes it's a relevant crime fighting tool, but we have to look at effectiveness of how we use that and how we leave people feeling at the end of that encounter.
Thank you. Nuala, do you want to follow on with your question with regard to accountability structures at this stage as well?
Yep, thank you. Chair, so some of this question is just following on from, you know, the stop and search, strip search, spit and bite guards, the police powers. I'm not going to get into them individually, but it's around the accountability structures, and we have had Chris Dodd have some explanation of external reference groups, the service accountability panel, and all of the roles that they play in terms of internal scrutiny. However, I just wanted to emphasise the importance of the scrutiny of the policing board, and that this is essentially the place as to where we have to respect that mechanism is in place, and this is where accountability should take place. So I just want to get a bit of clarity in moving forward as to what process is it going to look like in its final terms, of how an external reference group will be in existence, how the recommendations will be implemented and overseen when it does come. It's not just specifically to spit and bite guards, but overall respecting that this is the scrutiny board of the PSNI.
Yeah, absolutely. We're not trying to do anything to usurp that relationship, because, I mean, apart from in the legislative framework, it's hugely important. All we're trying to do is effectively, as we bring information eventually back here, because even 2 questions today show the interest in that and other use of powers, that in a nice way, but just not coming out with their own answers and marking their own homework. But there is a lot of evidence beyond these shores, and indeed, you know, across US sort of policing jurisdictions as well as here, about getting this interaction right. So the local panels are designed to make sure at district level, recognising the role of the PCSP, but that commanders have a full understanding of how we are operating a range of powers, how effective, and what the consequences can sometimes be. So, for example, if you look at stop search, is there a correlation in certain areas between what we find and complaint levels? You know, so that we're trying to look longitudinally at the data rather than just in silos. And similarly, the reference group is just to stimulate thinking, so that we're not in that group think this is how we should solve it. And we're keen to keep that in a dynamic space. But again, it's probably through yourself, Chair, if there's interest, maybe for Chris to bring a more specific briefing to committees so we can go into the detail. But absolutely, we're not trying to replace or reinvent the policing board. We're just trying to get better insight between how we use the data and how we improve officer behaviour and interactions with the public.
Thank you. Well, again, it would be useful to have a fuller update from Chris when he's at the point of triggering something on there.
Chair, sorry, can I
go ahead.
Just that whenever there is, I understand that there is supposed to be a meeting at the end of October that hopefully does take place. But if we can get some feedback before that meeting, whether that's going to be a formal consultation, whether it's, you know, face to face as to what the external reference group would be like, but also if Chris could feedback the difference between that external reference group and the service accountability panel, because I think it is important as board members that we have all of the relevant information that does assist us in our scrutiny role, that there isn't any missing information.
Thank you. Sinead has a question with regarding antisocial behaviour. Sinead.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your answers so far, Chief Constable. Can the Chief Constable update the board on the situation regarding antisocial behaviour, especially those that are on bail? and that are required to reside outside their place of residence in their normal area. I specifically want to know what steps the PSNI is taking to deal with this, and to what extent is the police service in working in partnership with the health trusts to deal with alcoholism, addiction, and the rising number of attempted suicides. And then thirdly, just on the back of it, you know, Chief Constable, have you any concerns at all about bail management?
Yeah, there's quite a lot there, so if I missed something. Bail management, I suppose, is the first question. And again, we can get specific figures to show you the trend over the last 18 months. But previous Chief Superintendent of Criminal Justice, Mel Jones, who's aware in the Strategic Command course at the moment, did a lot of work to sort of put more line of sight into how we're following up with people on bail. That they turn up to the agreed date to present themselves back to the police station. And if there's any conditions, if it's, for example, court bail, that they're being enforced, because in one sense these people are already presented a risk, you know, at the system. Clearly, I think we have to be careful to say not everyone on bail would create problems of antisocial behaviour. There's some people that legitimately bail for all sorts of reasons. And the good news, in terms of antisocial behaviour, we've seen steady decline. I think it's 25% down now when you look at figures over time. But we're not complacent, because when you look at the reasons, some of it will actually be improved crime recording, which will put what maybe have been put as an incident is now a crime. And similarly, when you go to the broader question, there is a lot of work going on in terms of relationships with third parties. So you've got the safeguarding hubs, which again has been a relatively new member. We're happy to facilitate a visit where risk and vulnerability will be discussed on a daily basis, and the appropriate agency allocated to deal with people that present different forms of problem in the place they live. And as you say quite rightly, whether it's alcohol misuse, drug misuse, mental health problems. We have a multi-agency triage team that works in Belfast. Clearly a question we'd like to ask is, could you expand it? But going back to the start of the meeting, in tough times with fewer resources. We've got all the custody healthcare work, which there's, again, a lot of work going on to see how we can expand that, because that is really good at spotting risk in the custody setting and forming that into different places. And similarly, in the broader question, and it's come up a few times really this morning, the work that washes through from other agencies, be it the ambulance service, where we'll pick up calls, which again present around some of these underlying issues, or indeed the enduring problem of, you know, when you say, where do you want to find a police officer at 9 o'clock at night, we'll go to A&E and look at the queue. They are, frankly, most of the time consequences of failures of other part of public service, and we pick up the slack because we're the ones there around the clock. Much as we try, you know, I don't see much prospect of change at the moment, but we recognise that we've got to work out how smartly we can push work back if we have to, but we also have to recognise at 3 in the morning there's a person in trauma or in trouble, and somebody's got to pick up that risk in the moment. So it's easy to talk in sort of esoteric terms about we've got to do more, but in fairness to people at that critical point of somebody's life, who is going to show up and do something. So I think the broader question picks up a lot of the bigger issues to the work we're doing at the moment about, you know, what can the public expect us to do reasonably, and equally where other partners do have to come to the table more to use either the powers or the resources they've got to keep people that are vulnerable either off the streets or in their homes, depending on what the issue is. But I don't know if anyone else wants to say anything in that space.
I suppose just, you know, the board continually asks the question about where we're going to feel the pressure as resources diminish and where you make difficult decisions. And some of these are the areas where, you know, between crime, non-crime calls for assistance, so forth, the difficult calls may have to be made. We're trying to support each other as a series of emergency services, but, you know, the collective effort of the emergency services is to meet the demand from the public. You know, and what we're trying to avoid is to get into conversations with what's very specific police demand. And these are, I think, where, you know, we could have difficult conversations going forward, but our, you know, our commitment to the public is unrelenting on trying to keep them safe and come to them when they need us. But, you know, in focusing on one area, then that will mean that other areas that maybe that aren't as serious a risk, perhaps, potentially could then get a slower response. And these are the types of things we'll see a corollary of as the numbers continue to reduce.
Speaking from as a rep for the Foyle constituency, I see on a daily basis almost antisocial behaviour and the impact that it has on the police force. And then I also see that, you know, while you might classify it as antisocial behaviour, it's severe mental health issues that we're experiencing on the streets, either as a result of as a result of their lives and difficulties that they have. But it is really impacting the other services as well. And it seems, and it appears to me, that the PSNI are having to step in when really we need provision for mental health issues right around the clock, and they're not there. And we've even seen, you know, the severe impact that they can have in our city centres, as in Belfast this weekend. You know, that fire, I suppose, I mean, it's an ongoing case, but it has severe impact into our urban and areas in particular.
Absolutely, I think we all recognise. I mean, antisocial behaviour is a sort of phrase that falls off your lips, isn't it? But behind it, if you're living through it, either you see it in front of you when you're out on an evening out or walking your dog in the park, or indeed you're on a housing estate where there's a lot of problems. It can have an effect on your own well-being and health, never mind the consequences of someone's doing it in the first place. So it's an issue we take really seriously, and underpinning this is a lot of investment in problem-solving training, so that we're not just trying to go and see the same people for the same things over and again. Michael talked about the performance data, but for example, we're looking more carefully at repeat offenders across a range of different crimes because there's a clue. Can we put interventions in to stop that reoffending, which reduces work, but also the effect on communities? So we can assure you that something, as Mark said, we want to keep our eye on, but equally, sometimes, as you know, I don't like losing these phrases because people talk about low-level crime and incidents, and then, well, actually, what does that mean when you're the victim of it? It could be the worst moment of your year. But actually, we're going to have to get to some hierarchy of risk. What is a serious crime we'll respond to, or a serious incident that we can turn up to quickly? And then are there different and more creative ways we can use the skills of other agencies to manage some of these problems? But it is a big systemic issue, and probably one of the big issues for the government when it returns about how we're going to manage people with a whole range of issues that present in different places.
Thank you. We started off by commenting on the strategy to tackle violence against women and girls, and Deirdre has a question on this and on the cultural audit PSD, and potentially a follow-up from Linda as well, but Deirdre first.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. It's around really the launch of the strategy, which was great to see. I suppose alongside of that, there's a cultural audit, and that will maybe inform professional standards. The strategy itself, I mentioned before, is quite outward facing rather than looking at internal in terms of the professional standards and confidence in policing. So alongside your cultural audit and your strategy being launched in an action plan, and you have a coordination group to look at that, at what point will the findings from the cultural audit inform your professional standards and an indicator in your action plan so that can be monitored?
Yeah, I'll bring Claire in, who's doing the cultural audit commissioning, and then let's see.
Thank you for the question. I suppose to be transparent, the two work streams are different. As you've rightly outlined, the violence against women and girls strategy has a large lens which is external about eradicating and preventing violence against women and girls across society. However, there is obviously a correlation to the cultural audit because it does have a work strand which is about our own PSNI conduct and behaviour and our culture. The cultural audit is in this year intentionally internally focused, and it will examine the range and mix of workplace factors that come together to create organisational culture. When we have conducted that first audit, which, as you know from previous updates, we hope to be by the end of the financial year, it will provide us with some baseline data, and that data will inform and it will link to other aspects of work. So the internal strand of the violence and women girl strategy, and also it will relate to other work under PSD, such as the Code of Ethics, our values, and what behaviours and competencies we want to develop in the organisation in future years.
So in terms of your action plan and your coordination group who are going to look at that, there will be a driver within that updating that action plan in the areas from that, yeah, definitely.
So if I may, Chair, as well, just, yes, I mean, it's not an ongoing process, but indicator 2 of the action plan and constant policing, that indicator is very much internal as well. And it's meant to be. There's 2 elements to it about improving confidence in police report, but also improving people's confidence in us as a service because of our conduct. So the superintendent from professional standards sits on the implementation group for the violence against women real strategy to lead on that specific element of it from professional standards. And the actions that we're taking about, in fact, in some respects, some of the professional standards elements have gone ahead of everybody else because of the action we're taking about review of historic cases and the stance we've taken on domestic abuse and sexual violence and allegations of the same. So I'm not going to say I'm confident, Deirdre, but that's happening. What we don't have is the piece that the cultural audit will or not show up about how the organisation as a group think about these matters, the behaviours, the micro behaviours, the obvious behaviours and so forth. That will then also help us inform whether or not the Code of Ethics, which was discussed earlier, will need to be further addressed, and also whether or not then there needs to be adjustments made to the misconduct processes. And the conversation that we had with the board last week, I believe it was last week, about misconduct, quite a bit of that was focusing on obviously these issues, and the board have clearly indicated, and we briefed that there's clear improvements that we can make to the misconduct processes. So whilst that's not directly related to your question, there's a lot of additional work which hopefully is supporting the internal piece around violence against women and girls. And I think anecdotally there's some commentary to say that as an organisation we are doing stuff internally that maybe others haven't started yet as an organisation in the broader scheme of violence against women and girls as an employer. And I'm not saying we're not claiming any plaudits for that, but I think we're certainly advanced in it, and I'm relatively happy that there is a connection at the minute, but we need to wait for the cultural audit work to come forward.
I just think in terms of professional standards, some note in there, it's quite light within that, and it'll be very interesting considering the other policies that you're developing in terms of domestic abuse in the workplace as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Linda, did you want to come in there on the violence against women and girls?
Thank you, Chair. It has actually been covered in what Deirdre has asked. Thank you.
That's fine. Frank, you have a question relating to the backlog in the court system. Frank.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, Simon and team. At the start of the year, Minister Long shared with us that the volume of defendants awaiting in the court system had increased from 7,000 to 12,000, pretty much doubled. In August past, she said that unless this was urgently addressed with funding, it wouldn't be resolved until 2028, around to 2024. So I suppose my question is, what impact will the failure to address this criminality have on repeat offending, on your resources who are going to have to pursue criminals or criminality on multiple occasions? What about their confidence? Are they now going to say, what's the point that people are out walking the streets again? And I suppose the crux of the whole thing is, what impacts are going to have on all our families and all of society here when people are, pardon the phrase, free to ramble the roads because of the system has failed to address?
Thanks, Frank. Well, there's, ironically, you'll see there is some data in this month's report about some of the issues of performance. Some of it points to where we've got more work to do ourselves. We've seen a deterioration in timeliness and quality in some types of file, although there's a work going on now to remedy that. But there is clearly a lot of concern right across the justice sector itself, but also beyond that in terms of this well-rehearsed sort of discussion about the length of time it takes to get somebody who's committed a crime into court, the case heard, and then if they're found guilty, a punishment. So We've only got, as a police service, certain levers. There's clearly our own speed of response when a crime has happened, the support we give to victims, and that ongoing support. I've had discussions, for example, with the Director of Public Prosecutions. My belief is we should be charging more people, which will speed up the process because it triggers timeframes to get cases into court. I know we've had some thinking about actually using domestic abuse crime as a way of signalling will that work. Clearly, the big volume where the delays sit round is often in those cases which are released for report, where you'll see the figures about more lengthy delay. There's a lot of work going on to reduce delays in the Crown Court, but I can't give you any sort of perspective of confidence you're going to see this turn around particularly quickly. Clearly, like other parts of the UK, COVID had a significant impact on the volume of people stuck in the middle of the system, from arrest through to charge and then appearance at either the magistrates or the Crown Court. That has not helped. It's a bit like the hospital waiting list analogy, because as fast as you're trying to reduce the delay of that cohort, we are still arresting people day in and day out, and that adds to the list. So that this is a complex issue. As you say, though, there's been no investment that's over and above the resources that any part of the system has. And back to the original conversation, little prospect we would see of any more money at the moment. So it remains a big strategic issue for us, and clearly the outworkings will be the worst case scenario of, should I report this to the police? Why will it take so long? And you've probably had experiences of I had of, it came up the other day at the Violence Against Women and Girl launch, how we stay in touch with the victim over a number of years when they can feel isolated and frustrated, and it doesn't just apply to that sort of crime. So there's an awful lot of consequences of the delay problem. My plea to the public is keep telling us where crime's happening, and we will keep investigating it, but we cannot remedy all the logjam in isolation.
So if I could just come back, and I don't want to put you on the spot here, but is your view that it's going to get worse before it gets better?
When you look at the general prospects at the moment, yes.
Thank you. John, I don't know whether you was a supplementary on that. If not, go ahead and ask the question you'd indicated anyway.
It's a very separate question, Chair, but nonetheless an important one. And people will have seen a BBC Spotlight edition aired earlier this week, which focused on badger baiting, an illegal activity often carried out under the disguise of fox hunting. This programme was particularly harrowing in its detail, but also leads to a sense of hopelessness that this illegal activity is apparently continuing on a widespread basis. So could I ask the question of the Chief Constable if the PSNI could lead on the establishment of a task force in order to focus on animal welfare and wildlife crime, and on a multi-agency basis then try to deliver better on these issues?
Yeah, thanks. I didn't see the programme myself, so we already have a wildlife crime team, which has got a blend of, there's a lawyer in it, there's a police officer, police staff, and we have rural officers, you probably know, across the rural districts. Certainly happy to take away out of here with Bobby, is the focus there, but I can't see a prospect of finding new resource. I think the question we've got to ask is what are they doing within the sort of ambit of their existing approach, and clearly also recognising, as you say, there are other agencies that also have quite explicit powers in the space of animal welfare.
Chair, if I could come back on that, I think what we need to examine through that task force, and perhaps before the establishment even of such a task force, is how the actions of those agencies dovetail together in relation to wildlife crime and animal welfare issue. There's a multi-structured system here. We have a government department, DERA, with responsibility. We have a group system run by our 4 local councils with responsibility for animal welfare responses, and then of course the police in relation to illegal activity. So I think at the very least such a task force could look at, as I said in the original question, how to do this better. I don't think it would be a massive additional resource for police, but that there is somewhat an urgency to try and get action taken on this, because it's been proven time and time again that this illegal activity is widespread and it's continuing.
Okay, thank you. I mean, there certainly is a need to join up, as with all of areas of approach. Silo mentality is never a good one. There are lots of bodies involved here, so we do need to establish who takes the lead, if you like, in this, but that we actually set up something to look at it. Yeah. Thank you. Okay, I have two further questions that I know of, so I'm just checking in case there's anybody else who wants to ask, but they're from Trevor and then Jerry. Anyone else who thinks they left out indicate otherwise. Trevor.
Thank you, Chair. I have two areas I want to ask questions around. I think we're all aware, or everyone should be aware now, in terms of online hate, crimes, threats, and so on and so forth. And in many of those incidents, individuals who are making those threats, identities are hidden. And some of those cases, that's not. And we are aware that the PSNI have been successful in some cases in the past in terms of getting convictions. I've been approached by someone, and I'll speak to you offline, I don't want to get into specific details, but the identity of the person who is making the threats has not been hidden in this case. But the perception of the victim is that the PSNI are dragging their feet. So what would you say to victims of crimes with perceptions that the PSNI are dragging their feet in those cases?
Well, certainly, without sounding defensive, without the evidence, I can't go into specifics. I'm happy to speak at the end of the meeting, Trevor. There's an actual case we can look into. Is the delay, is the right level of experience? Often, I think there's an event I'm coming to with you on Saturday where we'll be talking about online hate and internet crime. So there may be more we can also do there, but you'll appreciate from other cases we've talked in the past, this is about aligning right skills to the problem. Depending on what the issue is and where it's landed, sometimes relatively junior and experienced people will investigate what can become a complex case. We've probably talked in this setting where at times, for example, hate that's against politicians, journalists will have specific protocols and one senior investigating officer for the country to coordinate those issues. But clearly, we all see most weeks about the awful effect of trolling or other behaviours, whether it's extortion, blackmail, etc. So I would encourage people to keep reporting it to us. It is an issue we do understand the impact, but I've been able to say on around specific what the issue is. I can't really do that at the moment. But we have invested heavily in both technologies, through the cyber centre, as well as training in officers to deal with issues. And clearly, if there's an IP that is known, we will have a look at the end of the meeting about are we sort of delaying what could be a swifter response to the problem.
You all appreciate. I didn't want to get into specifics in this public forum, but I'm happy to do afterwards. In relation to the other one, and this isn't a public forum, and I'm trying to be careful what I say in relation to the court case that you're defending. What would you say in relation to your own defence or the suggestion, and I'll read the quote from a local paper where it said that you had an unprecedented critical incident which drew heavy criticism from Sinn Féin and jeopardised wider public confidence in Northern Ireland and the reformed police service. I mean, we've talked many times about two-tier policing and the perception of two-tier policing. But given that this goes on to say then that there has been aspects of that in social media, and there was all sorts of political leaders up to Deputy First Minister at that time. So could you understand or could you appreciate from my perspective as a unionist, where it seems that the support that Sinn Féin is giving the police is conditional, and that you've been driven to make a decision based on the political influence from Sinn Féin on that particular case?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. I know it's a question that appeared in the media. I think it was Monday evening, maybe Tuesday as well. I think in fairness to yourself and indeed others that have an interest in this case, I think the time to answer the question with more candour is when we're at the end of the case. I've certainly been advised, knowing that this issue is of public interest, to say nothing in relation to the case at the moment for fear of putting myself in jeopardy of contempt of court, so that I will reserve commentary until the judge has come to his determination, however quickly that is, and then there may be the time then to reflect on what the judgment means. But I understand what sits behind the question, but I don't think I'm in a place to answer it at the moment.
Okay, thank you. And then final question from Jerry.
Thank you, Chair. Chief Constable, I just want to bring it back. It's a couple of weeks, we remember the incident in Carrickfergus, where there was a huge crowd, quite a large crowd, outside a house and believed to be intimidating. There was reports at the time that it was the UVF And I just wanted an update really, because there was also, if I remember correctly, the police did not mention anything to do with any paramilitary organisation, and what way it's been handled. Is it a hate crime? I mean, it clearly was an attempted intimidation. And if it is, I mean, the reason I'm asking whether it's called a gang or whether you call it except term as UDF, it would be a bad omen of what's going on when you think back not so long ago when we were dealing with the same issue in a whole district.
I know the case you mean. Probably bring Mark in just to give some of the update operationally, because it's been something he's been overlooking.
Yeah, I can't say an awful lot about it, Jerry, but certainly it's been reported to me that there were paramilitaries involved with this, and that certainly is our primary line of inquiry. That's what happened that evening. I don't want to go into all the detail of what occurred, but yeah, that seems to be the case. And we've seen these issues in Carrick before, and the local command team and primary operations branch to the PCTF and so forth are continuing to work on those groupings. But yes, that would be the current position.
Thank you. And I mean, I understand it's an ongoing case, and I don't want to say anything myself, but I mean, have there been any arrests? If it is, it's now been verified it's a paramilitary activity, and there have been other cases. That's the worrying thing, that there is active paramilitary activity, and people want to know is arrests.
Yeah, and we'll come back to you just in the detail of that, but I don't believe there's been arrests. I don't believe there's been arrests specific to that event that evening yet.
Okay, thank you very much to all of the board and to the senior team of the PSNI for taking the questions. Normally this would be the end of proceedings for the day, but because we've restructured things for the next 3 months in trial, we're going into private session now upstairs so the board and the Chief Constable and the senior team need to move up there now. Our next meeting in public will be on the 3rd of November, which is the day before our 21st anniversary. So the policing board is about to become of age. Although actually that probably shows my age, because it's 18 these days that you become of age, not 21. Anyway, thank you to those who joined us online, for those members of the public who've been here, and we will see you again on the 3rd of November. Thank you.